Okay. Go ahead. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of your wedding, marriage. And why don't you tell us how you guys first met?
Probably isn't a real good, I don't know. What's your recollection?
Recollection is I was at a party and you came and said you were my date.
You were drunk.
I was drunk. I was
Mom
asleep.
picked you up?
Your mother picked me up.
No, somebody told me that you needed a date because the girl that, Connie Swank, that was going out with Steve wanted to go see Steve. So I came along with her because she didn't want to go by herself. So we went to the party and I said, well, where is Jim? And they said, he's in there asleep. And so I had some 6-pack of beer and I brought the 6-pack of beer and I said, you want to go jitter? And you thought that was a funny thing to say. So I said, well, here, you can drink the beer and I'll jitter around the chair. So that's what I did.
It was a real nice evening. It was a lease-breaking party for one of our SAE brothers.
A lease-breaking?
Lease-breaking party.
How do you do that?
Have a party that just basically destroys the house and the owners want to throw you out. So that's the how we met. And after that, I chased your mother all over the place from a standpoint of trying to take her out again. And
I think you called the next day.
Yeah, the next day. And anyway, we had a very short whirlwind romance that wound up with a large family.
How long were you dating?
Oh, we dated from, I think this was in maybe November, something like that, when we met.
December.
Then your mother went on Christmas break, and I called her several times during that Christmas break and came back to school, and we dated pretty seriously for 6 months. And then when school was out, I went up to Nevada, by north of Winnemucca with
We were
Steve.
engaged before you went.
Yeah, we got pinned, the whole sorority fraternity thing, got pinned and got engaged. And I went to, like I said, north of Winnemucca, Nevada, to put up hay with a stepfather. And Steve and I were up there together for the whole summer, and my soon-to-be wife was running around with all the old boyfriends.
No, I was not. I was going to tell you, though, we were at San Jose State. It was the second semester of my senior year, and he was in the fraternity next to my sorority, so I had seen him. So it wasn't like I didn't know who he was, but so when, Connie asked me to go with him, I said, oh, okay, because I was going to stay home and do my hair because I had turned down a couple of dates. I enjoyed going
But when
out.
she found out it was me, she came running with her 6-pack of beer.
I didn't buy the 6-pack of beer. That was, Steve had it, and he says,
Was it
this will
Steve Snell?
wake him
Steve
up.
Snell, yeah, Steve Snell.
Good. So where did you get engaged? Or where did you ask her?
Oh, I think on the doorstep of the Sigma Kappa house. And we went out looking for rings, and anyway, I bought a diamond from Steve for the engagement ring, which was an engagement ring he'd had for one of his girlfriends, and he didn't need it anymore. Picked out a setting in town and got engaged and set a wedding date for September 10th. It would have been 1960, which was only 2 years after I got out of the Navy. And
Didn't have much freedom, huh?
didn't have much freedom. I was working for a public accounting firm and going to school, and through that met a guy and managed apartments for him, and that's where we first stayed. We had a 1-bedroom apartment on 11th Street, and then moved to another apartment house over on Maglioka Magliocco Street, where we had a 2-bedroom apartment, and managed that for a period of time
This was while you're married?
while we were married, yeah.
And Mark was born there.
Mark was born there on Magliocco, and then we bought our first house on Blossom Hill, not on Blossom Hill
Meridian.
Road, on Meridian Street near Blossom Hill Road.
In
What'd you
San
pay
Jose.
for that house?
We paid $17,900 for that house, 4-bedroom house, about 1,600 square feet, I think. Nice little house.
Had 4 bedrooms. So.
We had 4 bedrooms. Michelle was born there, and then we decided we needed to move to Hawaii, and
Well, you always wanted to go to Hawaii because you had been stationed there when you were in the submarines.
yeah.
So you didn't have a job that took you there? You just wanted
No,
to go?
we had a job. I had a job. A friend of mine from Pete Marwick had moved to Hawaii and had a job with Dillingham Corporation. And he called me up one day and said they were looking for a controller for the merchandising division. And at the time I was working at Container Corporation there in San Jose, or Santa Clara. And I went to San Francisco and interviewed with the guy, the vice president of finance for the company, and they offered me a job and moved us over there. And stayed with them for, I think, 3 years. Then somebody from a company called the Hawaii Corporation came and said they wanted me to go to work for them, so I did. And anyway, we stayed over there for almost 10 years, 9 years and a few months. Lived in, your mother likes to remind me, 3 different houses while we were there. She hates to move.
What was the fascination with moving?
Fascination of moving was upgrading, always upgrading.
Well, I think, both of Daddy and I were Navy brats. Our parents were both in the Navy, and so we were used to moving. So it wasn't, we didn't think too much about how it would impact us. We just did it. And if it was upgrading, we just did it. So, I hear there are a lot of people that wouldn't come to Hawaii because they didn't want to be uprooted, and because we had been uprooted as kids all the time, it wasn't hard to move from one place to another if it meant a job. I always said we took our best vacations when we moved. So.
The thing that they told us when we moved to Hawaii, this was back in the days when Hawaii was really a long ways away from anything. Plane rides were several hours. They were propeller-driven planes, and we got there and people talked about getting island fever, and they said that everybody that comes here to work either winds up getting divorced or having a bunch of kids. So we looked at one another and said, well, let's have some kids.
Oh, we didn't either. I said I didn't know how they had kids because it was so hot. I was sweating all the time. Oh, I just couldn't. The humidity was
So was there,
90% just about.
there was no air conditioning in the house?
No air
No,
conditioning.
and swamp coolers wouldn't work down there?
We never even thought about putting a small.
Well, swamp coolers wouldn't work anyway. But
The,
nobody had swamp coolers. The only things that were air conditioned were office buildings and hotels.
I don't even think we had a fan, did we?
No, but you didn't need one. There's a few hot days.
Ah!
After you got used to the humidity, it was
Yeah,
okay.
when your shoes turn white from the mildew and that. I remember the time I even put my underwear in the microwave just to get it warmed up because it was all damp. And,
We didn't have a microwave then, hon.
yeah, we did.
No, we didn't. They didn't.
I'm sure.
They didn't even have microwaves when we moved to Hawaii. They came later.
Well, then the oven.
Yeah, I think the oven.
What about the birth of your kids out there?
Hmm?
What about your kids out there?
Kids
Having
out there.
kids out there.
First there was Matthew, who was stillborn, and then along came you
A year later.
a year later, and then decided that she didn't want to raise you by yourself,
No,
so
you decided.
Danielle came along, and we had a good time. Had a good time in Hawaii.
I'm sorry that the younger kids didn't get the experience because you were only in kindergarten when we left. So that's part of the reason you don't remember anything. But I think Mark and Michelle had a good time. I think the only thing that I was a little disappointed in that the public junior high and high school were not very good, and drugs at that time were really bad, and so that's why we put them in the Lutheran school over in Honolulu. So, but I think they learned a lot, and obviously, you know, when they go back, they just love it. So it was a good experience, I think. Well, and then also that was where we learned to take all the foreign students. We had all the Rahim, who was from Malaysia, and then we had Lavani from Laos, and then that one girl from, I think her name was Eleanor, from Hong Kong, and
Yeah.
and then
Were these all separate? You didn't.
well, they did a different thing. They didn't live at your house. They just came over like on weekends or on special occasions if it was a holiday or something. But like with Rahim, Daddy and Mark would always sail. I think you took a friend or two once.
Yeah, when we went to Maui.
On Memorial Day and Labor Day, they went to Maui, and they took Rahim. Was it just one time or two?
I think just one time.
But he was always saying, I'm from the
Pirate
heritage, so I don't get seasick. Well, I think the first wave he was throwing up or something.
Yeah, just about.
What even got you into exchange students or taking in exchange students? How did that come about?
I think it was the Tories. They lived on the other side of Glendennings. The Tories, Glendennings, and us on Paupua Loop became like a family. And I know Jackie Torrey she had been a airline stewardess. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but
I don't think so.
They got involved in taking some exchange students. It sounded interesting, so that's what we did.
The University of Hawaii had an international center. They had a lot of foreign students there, and they had several events that we went to and got involved in the exchange students. They really weren't exchange students. They were foreign students going to the University of Hawaii, and they wanted to host families to just kind of introduce them to what it was like living in Hawaii.
So how did you end up moving from Hawaii then? What took you off the island?
The Hawaii Corporation had owned a 50-some-odd% interest in a medical equipment leasing company in San Francisco, and I decided it was time to go back to the mainland because you kids were becoming too localized with the Hawaiian culture. One of the funniest
they didn't want to go to the mainland.
One of the funniest things that happened, we went to the Big Island, and we took a bus from Kona to Hilo, and when we passed over the top of the island, there was low-hanging clouds, and it was like fog. And Mark and Michelle both couldn't believe that there was fog there, or what was fog, and they were reaching out the bus window to touch it and stuff like that. And I decided then that we needed to get everybody back to the mainland so they could learn what the rest of the world was like.
Well, and they were thinking about college too.
Yeah, one of the trips we did take back to the mainland, we were driving from Palo Alto to Tracy, which was about two-hour drive, I think. And you kids just couldn't get over that you could drive that far and not get to where you were going sooner than 2 hours, because you could drive around the whole island of Oahu in a little over an hour.
Oh, 4 hours.
No.
From length to length?
Yeah.
No, it's 4.
anyway, it was, we decided it was just time to get back. Otherwise, you guys would be lost forever and grow up being local people and not understanding what the mainland was like, or your grandparents for that matter.
And
So
then,
anyway, took the opportunity to move back to the mainland, worked in San Francisco for a year, lived in Marin, moved twice, once there, moved to a house in Greenbrae that we were renting when we came back, and then after a year moved to a house in San Rafael.
And rented.
And it was another rental house.
now you took on exchange student there too? Was it Matt?
Yeah, man.
Was
Yeah, we
was he
had
the
a-
first
A
real
real
exchange student?
exchange student. He was, what is
Australia
it, AFS?
Yeah.
American Foreign Students or something.
Federation.
He's from Australia, and he lived with us for almost a year. So it was a fun time for everybody. Then after a couple years there, we moved to Bakersfield, and
Well, I was going to say, in the Harcourt House in San Rafael, we had a whole house full of kids because people were saying we must have a boarding house because I can't even think of the friend of Mark's that was Jewish and his father wouldn't let him stay in his house to graduate. So he stayed with us for 6 months. And then George came and lived with
George
us
came
from,
and lived with
and
us.
he was from Kaneohe. So we had, 3 extra kids of our 4. So we had turkey dinners a lot.
yeah, we did.
So all Matt was in the school plays or in the arts, I guess.
Yeah.
He was in plays and stuff. Is that why all the parties, or was it all the parties from
Well,
just
they
so
had
many
all
different
the
people
drama,
living in the house?
yeah. The
Mark
drama
and
kids.
Michelle belonged to a Christian group. I've forgotten the name of it, but so we always had lots of kids over from that group. Do you remember the name of
That was the Larkspur
it? Young
Pres-
Life?
Oh, Young,
Young
Life,
Life.
yeah.
I think it was
that
Young
was,
Life. Anyway, so lots of kids there. And then Matt was very popular with
drama.
the theatrical group, and they were always coming over and TPing the tree in the front yard and doing all kinds of strange stuff. Anyway, we had a good time. It was a great place for the kids to go to high school.
And then, as far as camping, when did all that start?
There, and when we were living in San Rafael, we used to...
Well, we took a lot of those kids that were coming to the parties with us when we went to Yosemite, and we went there, kind of continued the sailing trip that Daddy had with Mark and his friends. So every Memorial Day and Labor Day, we'd go to Yosemite and camp.
take a bunch of kids
Yeah,
with
we
us.
took a ton of kids with us.
Yeah,
So it was
yeah.
always 2 or 3 carloads that would go. One year we even had the Snells met us there in their camp. Oh no, they had a motorhome.
Yeah, motorhome. We went to Yosemite a lot. We went to Kings Canyon,
Cedar Grove.
Cedar Grove, and what was the Red Rock Canyon for Easter sunrise thing?
Oh, it was one of those places that you were supposed to look in a certain direction to see all the rocks change, and we got up bright and early and looked the wrong direction. Couldn't figure out why everybody was so excited about it.
Yeah, it wasn't
And
nothing
then George
place.
went the next year or something, and he says, we've been looking the wrong way. So, yeah, that was pretty funny. That was in the spring, around Easter time.
Yeah, it was Easter time.
Yes, and so the wildflowers were everywhere. It was really pretty.
What took you to Bakersfield?
Marin County was a funny place to live. Kind of a countercultural thing. A lot of hippies. It was a time when we were giving each other massages with pheasant feathers.
Peacock
feathers. And anyway, it wasn't a good environment to raise kids in, really. The churches were very liberal. Although one church we had a great pastor, but then Sherwood Cummings. He got Mark into running, and the first race that Mark was in with him around Angel Island, Mark beat him in the race. I think Mark was probably a junior in high school then, something like that. And the pastor from the pulpit talked about the race some, and then said to Mark, he says, "Curse you, Red Baron," because he beat him in the race. And so,
referring to peanuts.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a good time, but I thought it was not a healthy environment for children, although we were active in a lot of groups. Y Indian Guides we were very involved in that. You probably don't remember that, but we belonged to a Y Indian Guide tribe,
and Indian Princess.
And then we were in the Y Indian Princesses, and had several outings with those kids. Good time.
But I think it was your company. You were without a job for a while. So.
Yeah, they're looking for a job, and found one with Superior Oil in Bakersfield, and it was looked like a great place to live and a good company to work for. And so we moved there in 1979, I guess, yes. Lived there for 3 years.
Moved twice?
Moved once.
Well, we're two different houses.
Two different houses.
We moved there for, moved the second time, so Granddaddy Pete could live with us, and we found a house over there in San Marino. And was that considered the east or west?
Central.
West Bakersfield. We were on the east side.
Anyway, then one day I got a phone call from a guy that I used to work with in Hawaii, a guy by the name of Mark Lee. And he had left Hawaii sometime before we did, working for a real estate development company in Newport Beach. And he called me and he says, "Jim, you know how we always used to talk and say that a shoemaker ought to stick to his last, and you know that we're a real estate development company, and so in keeping with that tradition, we've just bought a rocket fuel manufacturing company, and we'd like you to go be the president of it. And it's in Las Vegas." So we went there and interviewed, and
did he actually say rocket fuel?
Yes, he did. Even though we know different now. Went there to interview, and seemed like it would be a good opportunity. And this was in July, and your mother said, "Well, okay, we can do this, but we have to move in time for kids to start school."
And they started in August.
And we called up and found out they started August 28th or something like this, and this was the end of July. I called up Mark and I said, "Okay, I'll take the job, but we have to do this quickly." And he said, "Okay." I went over to Las Vegas, drove over there one weekend. Your mother stayed home. I went over there to buy a house and went into this real estate office and said, "I'd like to buy a house and I need to do it today." And this lady thought I was some kind of nut. But anyway, took her and showed us some houses, and we bought the house on Fuente Street in Henderson, and got the movers and got everything.
But before that, because the company was owned by a family, we had to be interviewed. I had to be interviewed with Tom Moore. more. Remember we went out to lunch and he wanted to meet me too.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's immaterial.
How did we end up staying in the Continental for as long as we did? How long did we stay there?
Oh, I don't know, a few days.
Was
Oh,
it?
no, I thought it was about a week.
Oh, maybe a week, yeah. It wasn't that long.
Oh,
It was just waiting for the house to be ready. They
And
had
The
a-
house ready and the movers to get our furniture there so we could move in.
and Mark and Michelle got off the bus in Bakersfield. Did they go to college there then?
They stayed, yeah, they stayed
Mark
there
was-
because we couldn't sell the house. And so then they were going to the junior college there, BC. So they both stayed there.
So they lived in the house?
They lived in it by themselves, I think.
Yeah, well, Michelle got a place by her. When we left, Michelle was staying with a friend of hers, and then she got her own place, small apartment close to college. She was staying there, and then Mark was staying in the house for a while. I went back there one weekend to check on the house and do some things, and Mark had a motorcycle engine in the kitchen on a dining room table while he was working on that, and he thought that was fine, you know. But oil was dripping everywhere. Anyway, it was an
It was
interesting
still up
time.
for sale though, too.
Yeah, it was an interesting time.
What about Vegas? How did that whole work out for you?
Well, Daddy was commuting to Newport
For the
still.
first 3 or 4 months, I was spending my time in Newport. I had a couple of projects there they wanted me to work on. But anyway, it worked out fine. Everybody got started in school. You guys did. And we lived in that house in Fuente longer than we'd lived anywhere else in the whole time we'd been married. We lived there 7 years or something, 82 to 89. Yeah, 82 to 89, so 7 years.
But we heard about Cedar City when we first got there because Tom Moore always came up here to Shakespeare in '82. So we started coming up to Cedar City, not even thinking we'd ever live here.
Well, at one time there, we thought it would be nice to have a cabin or something up here. And then when we moved the plant up here, in actually '88, the fall of '88, we started construction on the new plant. We decided it would be nice to get something with a little acreage so your mother could have a couple of chickens. When we lived in Vegas, if you remember, she had chickens and
Ducks.
turkeys, and finally one of the neighbors turned her in because you couldn't have poultry in a residential area. Your mother still doesn't believe this, but they did cause flies to congregate around the house. So we had to get rid of all those animals. We gave them to some lady, some strange woman in Henderson, in the rural part of Henderson. Your mother
Well, I
hated
did.
giving up her white turkey. What was its name?
Rosebud.
Rosebud, yeah.
But I killed most of the ducks, so
Yeah,
that wasn't
that
very-
were released to the lake?
They didn't release them at the lake, no. No, well, we had duck l'orange that we couldn't even stick a fork in. That's when we realized that ducks, or any fowl for that matter, after a year, if they start laying eggs, you don't try to kill them because they aren't good, even for stewing. But anyway, I remember I had killed the duck and used, Taco was living with us then.
Yeah, how did
And-
Taco come into the house?
Well, Taco was an exchange student that we met in Bakersfield, and he stayed with us for a few weeks. It was a
It was-
short-term deal.
It was a high school deal that Doris Ship and the Presbyterian Church there, they got involved in and asked people in the congregation if they'd like to take some exchange students. They came as a group, they had their own interpreter and everything. So Taco lived with us for Takahiro Moriyama, lived with us for just 2 weeks. It was just a 2-week program, and then they would learn the government, and they would take them around different places of interest and stuff. So then when he decided he wanted to go to college in Japan, he wrote or called, or I can't remember how it was. Anyway, he was going to go back to Missouri and go to some school there, and then I said something about, well, Vegas does have junior college program, and you might look into that. So he looked into that, and because his English wasn't very good, he decided to come and stay with us. And we were thinking it would just be a year or so till he got into UNLV. Well, he never did pass the tests to get in there. So we ended up having him, I think, for 3 years or something.
Something like that. Long time. His English never got any better.
Well, it got better, but once he started having friends at the university, because they had an international group too, then he went back to not really learning too much English. But I think the funniest was we asked him to say the grace one time. I can't remember what he said.
Well, it always obviously say grace before meals, and obviously we ended all of our graces in Jesus' name, amen. And so one day after years there, we asked Taco to say grace, and he said a grace, and then at the end he said, just say amen. And we said, what? And he said, well, that's what you always say, is just say amen. No, Taco, it's not just say amen, it's in Jesus' name, amen. And he said, well, I get confused because when I eat, I always think in Japanese while I'm eating. And so it's hard for me to think English. Anyway, it was...
I thought he said, just say I am.
No. Anyway, it was an interesting time with Taco.
And what about all the explorations, all the trips to all the different places? Was that Mom's doing, or?
But I don't know.
Yeah, I took a class in college because I was a teacher's, my education was my major, so I was going to teach elementary school, and one of the classes was learning your community. And so when we were living in San Jose, they gave you a whole list of things that I didn't even know existed in the community. And there was the Egyptian Museum, and, well, everybody knew about Winchester Mystery House, where the lady was afraid she'd die if she didn't keep building something in her house, and it was mostly additions to the house. But that was when I first learned that every community has, you just have to look and go to the visitor center and learn about what the different areas are. And so when we went to Hawaii, I was miserable because of the humidity. So I got that Sunset Guide of Hawaii, and I would just go page by page every weekend. We'd go and find something that was there to be seen. So we got into some interesting, there was the Queen Liliuokalani Gardens, and everybody, at that time, a lot of the locals were sniffing glue, and we had this picnic, and these guys were zooming us with bicycles, and I was scared to death, and Daddy wouldn't move because this was our picnic time. And so we stayed there until we finished our picnic and left. And when we went to get in the car, this guy came up to our window and said, "Thank you for coming to our park, because these hoodlums have taken over and nobody nice comes to our park anymore." So that was an experience. But
Your mother's always been an explorer. She wants to see where she's living, what's around there, all the good things. And Bakersfield was a great place for exploring because it was close to everything. It was 2 hours to Yosemite, 2 hours to Los Angeles, 2 hours to the ocean.
We went to the zoo in
2
LA.
hours to Las Vegas. 4 hours to Las Vegas, I guess.
We never went to Las Vegas, did
No,
we?
not when we were living there, but after we moved to Vegas, we spent a lot of time back and forth. between Vegas and Bakersfield.
Well, I think it was because we went to Carmel and we go through Bakersfield.
Yeah.
Because my parents moved to Carmel after they retired and lived in Palo Alto, so we went to Carmel a lot. And that was actually when we first started going, it wasn't as bad as it is now. My goodness, you can't even move, so it wasn't a fun experience going back there that much in the later years, because grandmother would have to drop us all off at the downtown on Oceans, and we'd have to call her to come pick us up because you never could find a parking place.
What explain, or I guess how did all the trips to different relatives go? What did you do with all that time off?
The time off?
With the summers, you'd send the kids to grandma or to the.
That wasn't very long. It was I sent you, and I had 3 other kids at home. So it wasn't a relief. It was mainly so you would get to know your grandparents. I only saw my grandparents because my dad was in the Navy every 4 years, and we'd spend, maybe 5 days at the most seeing them. And my only cousin Sherry lived in Texas, and I had only seen her once or twice my whole life until we moved to Marin, and then her daughter, Christy, and Miss Danielle went to preschool there in Tiburon. That was the first time we'd ever lived that close to any relatives, I think, wasn't it? I don't remember. Oh, no, we didn't live. That was the very first time. We'd go see your parents mostly on holidays, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
we'd split the Christmas between your parents and my parents. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to move to Hawaii, so we wouldn't have to put up with that stuff anymore, fighting over whose parents we were going to spend Christmas or Thanksgiving with.
Because they didn't like the idea of we'd go half of the Christmas with one parent and half with the other, and it was getting harder and harder with you kids because we had to bring so much paraphernalia for the bit. You were just babies then.
Well, he wasn't even born then, huh?
No, right. It was just Mark and Michelle. But it still was a lot of stuff we'd always have to cart, and you just hated loading the car up.
Yes, I did.
We'll go over the transition from Vegas to Utah.
Well, it was kind of an interesting time from the standpoint we were building the plant. Plant in Las Vegas blew up in May of 1988. We started construction, started drilling a well at the plant site here in Cedar City in September of '88. And then it started operations in, I think, June of '89, and we had a dedication in October of '89. But from the time we started, I was spending most of my time up here, either in a hotel or we finally got some condos that we stayed in, people from Vegas that would come up. And we started talking about, well, we ought to start looking at some property, and I was thinking 5 acres so your mother could have some chickens and things like that. And then one day a friend, Frank Nichols, came to me and said, Jim, there's 160 acres for sale over here. That's a really good deal. I think you ought to look at it. So we looked at it and finally decided that we would buy it, and built the first structure on the property was the shop and what we call the barn, a guest house, and a little lean-to for horses and stuff. And Frank gave us a horse that we had, Big Red.
For free.
Yeah, for free. And then we were trying to decide what to put on the farm. And I said, well, 160 acres, we got to do more than just chickens. And so your mother said, well, why don't we get buffaloes? And I started reading about buffaloes and decided we couldn't handle buffaloes because they had no respect for fences and they're hard to manage. And then we said, well, remember when we lived in Bakersfield and they had the Buck Owens Rodeo in the parade down Main Street, and at the end of the parade they always had those longhorns in the parade? Why don't we get some longhorns then? And your mother thought that was a good idea. And we went to a few longhorn events to find out about them, and wound up buying 10 or 9 cows and 1 bull from Charlene Simpkin down in Prescott, Arizona. And that was the beginning of the ranch, and I stayed up here for a year living in the guest house. We built that first thinking that we would see if we really liked living out here. And then your mother, we sold the house and your mother moved up after...
Well, Danielle hadn't graduated.
Yeah, after Danielle got out of school. She moved up here.
She left
almost kicked out. Anyway, we moved up here and started construction of the main house, and we lived in the guest house for almost a year while the main house was being built. And it was kind of fun because you could supervise the daily progress of what was going on with the building project. And cows got brought up here, and they didn't have much fencing for the cows, so that, if you recall, that you and Chris built most of the fences around the property, along with other projects you worked on.
Well, we had, Michelle got married here. That was the big, we had only lived in, we moved into the house, I think it was a week before, getting all the furniture in and stuff, because everything had been in storage. And they were still planting plants the day of the wedding, completing the house. So we did have a pretty strict deadline, and everything worked out great, because you know, we'd come over here and check out the lights. We'd have barbecues and stuff like that, see if we had enough lights in the area around the porch. And then we extended the porch, because the original plans was just to go halfway in the back, and we extended around, and that really made things a lot easier too.
Yeah.
So it was a good process. And then here, we've lived here the longest we've ever lived anywhere, in one house and in one city.
Almost 20 years.
Over 20 years.
Well, not over. And not in
This
this
is
house.
2010.
Yeah, but we didn't, this house wasn't finished until 92. We've been on this property for over 20 years.
How did you get involved with all the volunteer work and all that stuff that you've done? The hospitals
that got started in Las Vegas.
No,
Yeah.
it was, you know, the biggest thing was my mother was a scout leader. And so that's where I started doing most of my volunteer.
Well,
and then plus being homeroom mother or something, like working in the school. So that was, that's all I ever did was scouting and school. And then Daddy said, when we were in Las Vegas, that, you know, you should go and do something without kids. Why don't you try volunteering at the hospital? Because they had at Rotary, the gal that was, I don't know, she was head of volunteers or something with the hospital, gave a talk, and she said, I think you'd really enjoy that. And that's when I started volunteering at the hospital. And then, you know, that leads to other community activities. Daddy was by that. Well, he, even in Bakersfield, he started, what was that group? It's not Rotary, it was something else, that was junior life. You got into the livestock there. You were a judge because of the group you were in.
Yeah, I've forgotten about that. Yeah.
What was it called?
I don't remember. Was it JC's?
Yeah, it must have been. Because you had to get out by a certain year. Didn't it go just to 30? You
36 or 35,
yeah,
36
you
or
couldn't
something
be in it
like
after that.
It had been in JC's in San Jose, and the Exchange Club in Hawaii, and Bakersfield, I don't really remember much about being involved in anything.
Well, I was just, that's when I did both Cub Scouts and Rainbow Girls. That's what the Bluebirds was, with you and Danielle.
Yeah.
And then, and I worked in the cafeteria, I think, at the high school, or maybe,
Yeah.
no, was it the elementary school?
Elementary
That was the
school.
first time, because they kept saying, now don't put your arms around the kids, because you could, you know, you're not supposed to touch the kids when you're on the playground. I go, oh my gosh. So if somebody got hurt or anything, you had all these rules and stuff.
But your mother really didn't get involved in the volunteering stuff in a big way until we moved to Cedar.
And the community, I always thought of a girl scouting as being a volunteer.
Yeah, but that's because
20
you had
years
kids.
in volunteering.
But in Cedar, she started volunteering at the chamber one day a week, and
Well, it was a visitor center then.
visitor center. And then she did the Shakespeare's volunteering, ushering during the summer, and got involved in
The guild.
Shakespeare Guild and a whole bunch of other things.
Well, I think the once you start, and then the Braithwaite, here, you know, everybody volunteers for something. So I was in music arts, and once I was in music arts, that meant that I should be a representative on a lot of other committees, and that's basically how.
So anyway, she got the Governor's Award for being Volunteer of the Year a few years ago. It was a nice award.
But it was also, Daddy was saying that, you know, because WECO had blown up in Las Vegas or in Henderson, people were not too excited about having us up here. And by us being involved in the community, they would see WECO in a different light. And that was, you know, I didn't turn down any volunteer jobs because I think it was an asset to Daddy being president of the company then.
So looking back over 50 years of marriage, is there anything you would have done differently, or the knowledge you've gained that you can share towards the other marriages going on?
Well, the one thing is not to have so damn many kids.
Oh, Jim! I think Jim, Daddy was, you know, basically raised as an only child, so that was a big adjustment, I think, once the kids came along. He worked a lot, so he wasn't around. But I think once that, you know, we started the sailing and the camping, he enjoyed having the kids there and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, well, marriage without children doesn't make much sense. I mean, for when you start off young, it's nice to have the family that you're growing with over the years. And as it stands now, I mean, 50 years is not the end. It's still view it as kind of still in the beginning, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
What's the key to sticking together?
Working at it.
Working at it all the time, I think, and
Don't let the little things get you, because that'll tear you apart. You need to kind of grin and bear it sometimes when things.
Because obviously you have conflicts, so you know, over the periods of time, as all of you kids have had, and what you just need to decide is this the hill you want to die on? You know, is this big enough issue to really draw a line in the sand and say you're not going past that? It's always just give and take.
Well, and also everybody that we knew that had gotten divorced, I don't think you increase your worth at all. You usually have to almost like start over. And that's one thing about a long marriage is you're always building on it, not having to divide things and start over. I think that I mean, I keep thinking, oh my goodness, to start dating over again, that would be horrible.
Is that what you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's, you know, you have to.
Is that why you stayed married this long?
but
You
you-
didn't want to start dating
No,
again?
no, I was going to say most of our friends have not got divorced. I mean, Ed Nelson was one, and Buzz and Mo.
No, but-
I mean, not Phil and Mo. Those are the only people we know that have gotten divorced that we've done things with.
Yeah,
I mean, the Rasmussens have always been together. I mean, all our good friends have not gone through that. And I think that's probably, you know, you learn through experience of others too. I mean, I think it makes a difference.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for the interview. Learning about the
Goodness,
50
it's
years of
over.
the Peeblers.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here.
And happy anniversary.
Thank you very much.